Yesterday, before I dropped by Dad's store, I was a loving husband with a wife I would die for and 2 friends that I greatly enjoyed. I had a very successful construction business and a great future. I was looking forward to the time my wife and I would have a child. Today, I am a bitter soul bent on destroying my wife and friends. Oh, I don't plan to do anything that would get me put in jail, but who knows? I might slip up and go berserk. I suppose you might want to know why I changed overnight. Well, I didn't really change overnight. Rather, I began worrying several months ago and changed in the blink of an eye. Listen to my tale of woe and follow along as I careen down the pathway of revenge. Let's start with the story. I lived and went to college in the same town I grew up in. All my friends, minus the few that moved away or had died for some reason, lived nearby. My father owned and operated the local building supply center and hardware store. He had wanted me to get my degree and come back to help him, eventually to take over the store. When I was young, he had forced me to work in the store. I spent many evenings and weekends there before I got out of high school and during college. I enjoyed talking to the contractors who purchased their materials from Dad. When I made deliveries, I watched how they built things and asked questions. I can't say I hated the job in Dad's store, but I didn't like it. The best part of the work was going on deliveries to help unload, and later, making the deliveries by myself. I really did not want to take over the store. When I was not working in the store, I did like many boys in town and mowed yards for pocket money. One day, I was working for a widow and watching her try to repair a storage building in her yard. She was having a lot of trouble, partly because she did not have the proper tools for the job, partly because she was not strong enough to do the heavy work, and partly because she just plain did not know how to proceed. Finally, when I finished the yard, I offered to help her. At first, she was hesitant because I was just a 15-year-old boy. To this day, I do not know where I got the courage to push her to hire me, but I did. I told her it was obvious she was not able to do the work, and I thought I was. I pointed out some of the things she was doing wrong and explained that she just wasn't strong enough or tall enough to do the job. I told her I would do it for $50 if she bought the materials. I also told her if she did not like the work after I was finished, she did not have to pay me. Finally, she agreed to let me do the work. I did the job to her satisfaction, and she paid me. She actually did something more valuable for me than giving me the money, though. She began telling her older single friends about my work and how good a job I did for her, both on the repair and in mowing her yard. I began getting calls from other women wanting me to repair things for them. I was always careful to do the work correctly. If I did not know how to do something, I would ask one of my contractor friends. I always charged less than a real licensed contractor would charge. After I had worked for several older women, I began to get calls from men and families. By the time I was in college, I had a small handyman business and had many of the necessary licenses to do the work. I also still had my lawn care business. I had to hire my friends to help from time to time to keep up, especially in the summer. I was making enough money in the evenings, weekends, and summer to pay for my college, a newer truck, and my dates. I was also able to enjoy my youth, although I have to admit I did work long hours and my dates always started later than most boys' dates did. After I graduated high school, I got tired of living with my parents and rented an apartment. I lived in the apartment during my first year of college. I did not enjoy apartment living, so I began looking for a house to rent after the year's lease ran out. One of my friends from high school had just divorced one of my best buddies, Joe. She had caught him cheating with one of our classmates and filed for divorce. Brenda worked as a real estate agent and struggled to make ends meet. We were talking one evening, commiserating about her failed marriage at our favorite hangout. We both lived in apartments and neither one of us liked it. I told her I was thinking about renting a house. I asked her if she had any reasonably priced rental property she could show me. She asked how much I could pay. When I told her, she looked shocked and said, "Hell, Stan, with a 30-year loan, you could buy a pretty nice house for that much a month. Why don't you buy a house instead of renting? That way, you could build equity instead of pouring your money down a deep, empty rat hole as rent." I told her I had never considered that and mentioned that I didn't have much for a down payment. "Well, let me do some checking and I'll get back to you," she said. When I left the hangout, I managed to get an older friend to buy me some beer. By the time the evening was over, I had forgotten about our conversation, but she sure didn't. I guess the thought of a nice commission does that to you, though. The next Monday evening, Glenda called me and asked to meet her at the bar again. In our town, we had several bars that served burgers and sodas in a small room where underage people could eat. When I walked in, she had some papers in front of her and she seemed excited. Almost before I got seated, she began talking. "Stan, I found several places that I think you can afford, but most of them aren't in very good locations. I did find one place for sale that I think you might like. Do you remember the old Harris place on the edge of town?" I nodded yes, and she continued. "Well, you know, when they got older, they built a nice new 3-car garage and put a mother-in-law apartment over it. I think they were planning to use it for a living caregiver if the need arose. The new garage was several feet from the house. 2 years ago, you remember the house caught fire?" I shook my head yes again, and she said, "Well, they decided not to rebuild and moved into a retirement community here in town. The garage was not damaged too badly during the fire. I was talking to Ida the other day, and she said they were tired of paying the taxes on the place and doing what little upkeep they did. She said they wanted to sell the place, and I listed it. It is 20 acres and they are asking $110,000 for it. You would have to do a little work on the garage and apartment, but it would be great for you. The best thing is all the utilities are already in. There are several newer houses going up in the area, so I really expect a contractor to try and buy it soon and subdivide it. It isn't in the multi-list book yet, so it hasn't shown but a time or two. They would only need about $20,000 down. Stan, a 20-year payment would be about half the rent you now pay monthly. So if you could make the down payment, I really think this would be a good deal for you." I thought about it for a while. I didn't have that much money, but from what I remembered of the place, I really wanted it badly. I told her I wanted to look at it the next evening. Later that evening, I asked Dad if he would loan me the down payment. I have to admit he was not real anxious to do so, but I reminded him the monthly payments on the land would be half the rent I now paid, so I could pay him some back each month after I got the apartment repaired and livable. We finally agreed he would loan me the down payment if I wanted to buy the place after I saw it. The next evening, I went to the place and fell in love with it all over again. Even with the burned-out shell of the house there, it was even prettier than I remembered. The fire didn't even kill all the trees and shrubs in the yard. I could look down the hill to a small stream meandering through the property. I told Glenda to write up an offer of $90,000. Tuesday evening after classes, I got a call from Glenda. She sounded excited and said, "Stan, I can't believe it. When I presented the offer to Ida and Homer, they were going to reject it out of hand." I was getting ready to leave when she turned to Homer and asked him if he thought you were the nice young man that had cut their yard all those years. "They asked me if you had a mowing service in school, and when I told them you did, they smiled and began telling me what a nice young man you were. Anyway, they won't take $90,000 for the place, but they did counter with $97,500. Isn't that great?" I didn't think for very long. I said, "Yeah, that's fine. Tell them I will pay that and I want possession at closing." The bank required my father to co-sign the loan, but it went through and I got possession of the property in late April. I made the necessary repairs and moved into the apartment on the 1st of June. The next few months, I kept busy with my summer business of yard work and small building projects. By now, I had 10 employees, most of them seasonal. I had a little time to date Patty and began to clean up my property. After I got the trash from the burned house cleared away, I had an engineer friend look at the foundation. He decided the foundation was sound since the subflooring had not burned through. The fire had been in the attic and second floor primarily, so I could use it to rebuild. This would save several thousand because I did not have to do as much dirt work and didn't need to pour a new cement foundation. The house had been a smaller, older structure of about 1,000 square feet on the first floor. I rented a backhoe and extended the foundation toward the garage, doing almost all the work myself. I began to use my spare time and spare cash to build myself a nice home. I connected the house to the garage with an enclosed cement floor, glass, and breezeway. I made arrangements to put a large hot tub on the cement pad in the breezeway. I installed a wood stove in this area for heat and ducted it into the rest of the house as I built it. The summer I graduated from college, I finished the house. It was 2,450 square feet, and I built it for comfort and convenience. I had stainless steel appliances, granite countertops, oak trim, and a brick exterior. In short, it wasn't a McMansion, but it was a very upscale home. I had a beautiful covered patio facing south, overlooking the small stream. I had finished it for about half the cost it would have sold for. Patty loved it when we got married. I almost got the impression Patty was marrying me for my house instead of myself. By the time I got out of college, I had graduated to building new structures. I built additions, repaired older homes and buildings, and garages too, but now a lot of my income came from new structures. I now had 20 employees. Patty began working for my father in his business when we became engaged. After she got her degree, she became a full-time employee and assistant manager. He was grooming her for manager when he retired. I was an only child, so the business would pass to us upon his death. I bought all my materials from Dad, so we compounded the family profits from my construction business. My wife Patty and I were childhood sweethearts, and I thought, like most married men, that we would be together forever. Oh sure, we had the normal squabbles like any married couple, but they were minor. When we were dating in high school and later in college, we had broken up like most young couples do. We both dated others and were intimate with others during that time, but we always came back together because we could not find anyone we loved more. I did have one girl that might have been the one, but one of my friends had her tied up before we made that decision. Finally, in our last year of college, Patty and I became a solidly exclusive couple. That Christmas, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. Patty set the wedding date in September after we graduated. The wedding almost didn't happen because of Patty's insistence on a prenuptial agreement. Now I wish we hadn't married. Oh well, on with the sad story. Apparently, Patty had inherited several $100,000 from her grandfather, and she, or maybe her father, did not want me to get my hands on it. I told her I had no desire to spend her money and resented the fact she thought I would marry her for it. In any event, we were not speaking very kindly to each other the night she told me about the prenuptial agreement. I suppose now that I was lucky that my parents were out for a drive and decided to stop off and see me. When Patty heard them knocking on the door, she was so angry she flounced out as I let them in. Before she went past them on the landing, I heard her say, "You need to talk some sense into your son, or this wedding may never occur." Dad and Mom watched as she stormed to her car and drove off. I was still standing with the prenup in my hands when they turned to me and asked what our argument was about. I told them, and Mom said, "Oh Stan, we thought it might be something important." "Honey, we know you aren't marrying her for her money, so what's the big problem? Sign the darn thing and marry the girl if you love her." Dad was sitting with a frown on his face and asked if he could see the agreement. He looked it over closely and said, "This seems pretty straightforward, except she did not have the attorney exempt your place here or your potential inheritance from us from the community property. It seems fair that if she exempts her funds and anything she may inherit from her side of the family, that the same should be exempt for you. Son, why don't we take this to the business attorney and have him make suggestions?" I reached for the agreement and read it through. Dad was right, it only addressed her money and her inheritances. I began to get angry again. I agreed with him, and he said he would make an appointment for me. I had used his attorney for my few legal needs, so I guess he was really my attorney also. I got an appointment for the following Tuesday, and the attorney agreed with Dad. He scanned the agreement into his computer and made the changes we discussed. When he finished revising the agreement, it exempted my land and business and anything I might inherit, just as it exempted the same for Patty. I went to her home the evening my attorney finished the changes to the agreement. I had already signed it. When Patty and her father read the new agreement, they both became angry. He looked at me and said, "Just what is the idea of changing the agreement we prepared, young man? I thought you loved my daughter, and now you are accusing her of wanting to take your house and business. You know when you marry, that will become her home also. If, heaven forbid, you divorce, don't you think she would deserve a place to live?" I became angry with him and replied, "Yes, sir, she would deserve a place to live, but it seemed fair to my father and to me that if the possessions she had before we married and her potential inheritance were to be protected in case of divorce, the same should apply to me. You will note that any accumulation we have from earnings or investments during the marriage would be divided equally unless the marriage ends due to infidelity. In that case, each of us would leave with what we brought into the marriage or inherited, and the non-injured party would leave with 75% of the marital assets accumulated after the marriage. I feel that there should be some penalty built into the agreement as compensation or punishment for any infidelity." Patty and her father were way beyond upset, they were furious about the proposed agreement. Needless to say, for the next few days, things were very tense between Patty and me. I asked several times why she was so upset about the agreement since she was the one who wanted a prenuptial agreement. Most of the time, Patty said it was because I wanted to turn her out into the street if we divorced and she loved the house as much as I did. She didn't think it was fair for me to get to keep her home if we divorced. I was almost ready to ask for my ring back when she began to thaw. She signed the changed agreement, but it took us several weeks to get back to where we were before she asked for a prenuptial agreement. We finally forgot our anger and forgave each other for the hurt feelings raised by the prenuptial agreement. We married as planned, and for the next 2.5 years, we did not look back and were never sorry. We never looked at another person as a lover, or at least I didn't. Now I know Patty did. I caught her yesterday. The only problem I had with Patty working in the lumberyard was all the flirting she had to put up with. I admit I was a little jealous, but I knew many of the men that purchased items from Dad. They were sex hounds, and Patty was a beautiful, fun-loving woman. One of my friends, Joe, was already divorced because he couldn't keep his pecker in his pants. Many times, I would go into the store and find him flirting with Patty. I won't say we argued over him or the flirting she did with other men, but we did have some spirited discussions. Patty maintained that she needed to flirt a little to keep the customers happy. I told her I thought she just needed to treat them nicely, be friendly, and be their friend, not a flirt. Of course, she took exception to me calling her actions flirting and said that was just what she was doing. My college degree was in construction management, and Patty got one in business administration, so our degrees supported our vocations very well. Shortly after I got out of college, I decided we had enough money to build a home on speculation. Dad let me be an exception to his rule requiring all accounts to be paid at the end of the month. He said since I was family, I could draw up to $100,000 on account and pay when a house sold. He did keep a lien against the properties, however, in case something happened to me. All other customers were supposed to pay in full monthly. I was good at my work and knew it. I was a general contractor, but I used very few subcontractors. I had my own framing, drywall finishing, plumbing, and wiring crews. I did hire out the heating and air conditioning work. I even used my still operating yard care crews to landscape and put in yards on my projects, assuming, of course, that the clients would hire us to do so. In any event, I used the speculation house to keep my crews busy during off periods. I did not want to lay my men off if I didn't have to, so I tried to keep them busy. We finished the spec house, and it sold before we had the yard in. I started another, and it sold before it was finished, and we completed it to the new owner's desires. Now I had enough money saved to do 2 spec homes at once. All at once, the business was booming, and I almost didn't have time to do the smaller jobs that had once been my bread and butter. Between Patty's salary and my profits, we were in tall clover. We were rapidly becoming one of the highest income families in our small town of about 25,000 souls. All our success came at a price, though. I would work 8 to 10-hour days with the crews and do paperwork before and after the day's construction. In the evenings, I would meet with customers and potential customers to make bids and discuss progress on their projects. Patty took to working late in the office to do her books. We seemed to have less and less time together. Many times I would go by the building center and see her car and 2 or 3 others there. Sometimes I would go in, and there would be Joe or one of our other classmates sitting and talking to her. They all worked in the building trade, so they were supposedly getting prices from her, but something just didn't feel right. Sometimes Patty would be flushed when I went into the office, and many times they would be drinking beer. Of course, I would have one with them, and we would visit, but things felt wrong to me. Finally, I decided to disable the local buzzer on the building alarm. Normally, when someone entered the building through any of the doors, a buzzer went off. I disabled the one on the entrance from the warehouse. Yesterday, before I dropped by Dad's store, I was a loving husband with a wife I would die for and 2 friends that I enjoyed greatly. I had a very successful construction business and a great future. I was looking forward to the time my wife and I would have a child. Today, I am a bitter asshole bent on destroying my wife and friends. Oh, I don't plan to do anything to get myself put in jail, but who knows, I might slip up and go berserk. I suppose you might want to know why I changed overnight. Well, I didn't really change overnight, rather, I began worrying several months ago and changed in the blink of an eye. Listen to my tale of woe and follow along as I careen down the pathway of revenge. Last night, when I went past the store, Joe's and George's trucks were both in the lot. I turned into the lot and went to the door with the disabled buzzer. I knew before I even got to Patty's office what I would find. I could hear her moaning and screaming from halfway across the building. I took out my cell phone and set it to take pictures. The damn witch didn't even have her office door closed. She was over her desk, and Joe had his pants down. He was standing behind her and having sex with her. Finally, he pulled back from Patty. She continued to lie over her desk. George walked up beside Patty and helped her stand. He pulled her to him, gave her a deep French kiss, and then said, "Here, honey, let's get you naked. I want to play with you." I watched and took pictures while George helped Patty strip. I was going to get a picture of him having sex with her and then go in and wreak some bodily harm on my two ex-friends. I backed away from the door so they wouldn't see me until I was ready. I remembered Dad usually had a tape recorder in his office and went to see if it was there. I wanted to tape some of the conversation if I could. I found the tape recorder and brought it back. I set it on the floor beside the door as I watched my wife service my two ex-friends. They continued for a few more minutes. I was further infuriated by the conversation I taped. As she stood up, I heard Joe say, "Damn, Patty, aren't you glad you let me drill you again at the Christmas party 2 years ago? I told you it would be the best damn sex you ever had in your life, didn't I? I was talking to Jared the other day and told him about the hot honey I was doing now, and he wants to meet you. Are you sure you won't let him come in some evening also?" Patty pushed him away and turned her head to him. "No, I don't mind doing you too. Hell, I love doing you too, but I don't want or need anyone else. I didn't like him when we were in school, and I still don't. The one time he screwed me before Stan and I got married, he was an asshole. He hurt me and didn't even make sure I enjoyed myself. I always enjoyed our time together before we got married, and I still enjoy it. If you can keep your damn mouth shut, we can keep this up forever, but you have to be careful. Stan is getting really pissed at the way you two are acting when he can see us. If you don't cool it, I'll have to cut you off." I decided I had enough on tape and enough pictures. I had picked up a baseball bat when I was in Dad's office. I was going to put the hurt on Joe and George. I picked it up and started into the room when I had a thought. George had always been really jealous. He was married to his high school sweetheart still. She and I had dated several times. In fact, they did not become serious until after Patty and I became engaged. I had enjoyed sex with her, so I thought I might just see if I could seduce her before I did a number on him. In fact, that would probably be a better payback than just knocking him around. He always cried in high school when she and he were on the outs, and he hated it the few times I had dated her. I quietly backed from the room and left the building. I did set the alarm and reattach the buzzer wires on the door as I left. I couldn't wait for the excitement when Patty and her two friends set off the burglar alarm when they walked across the showroom floor to leave. The alarm keypads were beside the doors, and there were motion sensors in the main part of the building, so before they could discover the alarms were set, the alarms would go off. I knew she would be able to disable the alarm, but the damage would be done. She would wonder how it got set, and she would have to wait in the building for the police to come. I wondered how she would explain the alarm and if Joe and George would have enough sense to leave before the police got there. Patty was very late getting home. She came into the house and walked up to me very nervously. I watched her face, and she seemed scared. I smiled to myself and asked her, "What's the matter, honey? You seem nervous, and you're a lot later than you usually are." Patty licked her lips and sat on the edge of her chair facing me. She said, "I was working late. We couldn't get the books to balance, and I didn't think I would ever find the problem. What were you doing tonight? I thought you might come by or at least call since I was so late. I know I'm getting used to you being late, but I didn't feel like coming by and drinking beer with you and your boyfriends." Patty's face turned white, then she blushed. "Damn you, Stan. I keep telling you nothing's going on. Joe and George weren't even there. Why can't you get it through your damn head that I have to visit with them to keep them happy?" "Okay, honey," I said. "I know you have to schmooze the customers. I just drove by around 6:30 and thought I saw their trucks there." "Well, they were there then," she said. "They came just about closing time, and I had to wait for them to pay for and load their order before I got to the books. They were gone shortly after closing. I just meant they weren't there the whole time I was. I'm tired. I'm going to take a nice hot bath and go to bed." I smiled and said, "Great, I'll be there in a jiffy. I've been horny all day." Patty looked worried again and said, "No, I'm sorry, honey. I'm really bushed. I don't feel like it tonight. Why don't we have a quickie in the morning before we go to work?" I just smiled to myself. I thought it would be a cold day in hell before I went for sloppy seconds. I wondered how many times I had gotten them without knowing it. I made a mental note that I needed to get tested for diseases too. I had just said that to jerk Patty's chain. The next morning, I left early before Patty woke up. As soon as my attorney's office opened, I called for an appointment. He managed to fit me in at noon if I would take him out for lunch. I agreed, and we grabbed a quick meal at a sandwich shop near his office. He wanted to talk about the problem there, but I asked him if we could just eat in a hurry and go back to his office. He said, "Of course, but what could be so secret we can't talk here? I do a lot of business over lunch." I just told him it was sensitive to my business and I didn't want things to get out until I had all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. When we got to his office, I began explaining what the problem was. I told him I wanted a divorce immediately based on Patty's adultery and wanted the prenuptial enforced to the letter. I showed him the pictures and let him listen to the tape. I also told him I would appreciate it if he only showed the pictures of Joe and Patty and didn't use the tape unless he had to. "Why do you want to keep George out of it?" he asked. "Well, I'm not sure you will approve, but after the divorce, I have some plans for George." "I don't want to tip him off," I replied. Lawrence, the attorney, broke in on my conversation with his, "I hope you aren't planning anything violent. I have to report something like that as an officer of the court." I laughed and said, "No, I'm not planning violence. I used to date George's wife, Susan. She and he dated and broke up several times, and twice I dated her during the breakup. They almost always go to Murphy's Tavern on weekends. I think I'm going to make some moves on Susan to piss George off. I want to give her the info I have on him cheating, but I want to play with his mind first. She will get a heads up on this, and I will get a little payback on good old George. He used to get so angry every time she dated someone else, and I hear he gets jealous when she spends too much time dancing with other people. I just want to see if I can seduce her after my divorce is final and let him find out about it. I guess you could say I want to give him a dose of his own medicine. I also intend to try and seduce Joe's fiancée. There will be no violence unless one of those assholes starts it. Stan, I don't like this. It could blow up in your face, but you are right. There is nothing illegal about seducing a woman, but you should know they could sue you for alienation of affection." I laughed and said, "Let them. Bring it on. I will countersue, and I have pictures and a tape to use in that suit. Don't you think it would be almost a wash?" Lawrence leaned back in his chair and thought a moment. Finally, he said, "Yes, the suits could possibly balance out if one is filed, but you need to remember you might have larger assets than they do. Even if you both won the lawsuits in court, you might come out worse off financially if there is a judgment against you. Besides, don't you think that is a disgusting thing to do to those ladies? I suppose they will be hurting enough just finding out about their men cheating on them. If you use them like that, it will surely hurt them worse." I have to admit my heart was made of stone. "No," I said, "I don't care. They took the chance when they chose those cheating assholes." Wednesday, I received a phone call from Lawrence. He told me the divorce was ready to file, and he planned to serve Patty that afternoon. "Great," I said. "I'll get busy and change the locks on the doors this morning. I will pack as many of her clothes as I can and put them on the front porch. I am going to place pictures of her and Joe on every door so she can see them when she comes over. Oh boy, I don't know who was the angriest when they hit the fan at Dad's store. I got a phone call from 3 very angry people within minutes of Patty being served. She called and had a screaming fit and told me I would be sorry I was ever born. Dad called just after she stormed out of the store. Her father called and cursed me out just after I hung up from talking to Dad. While I was talking to Dad, I said, "Dad, I really need to thank you for talking me into that prenuptial agreement. I filed for the divorce because I walked into the office Saturday night and found Patty having sex on her desk with Joe and George. I have pictures and a tape. Thanks to you, I will get to keep my home and business as well as 3/4 of our assets. I do think you should change your store locks and the computer passwords in case she decides to do something we wouldn't appreciate. I suggest you fire her, but that is your decision. You need to decide if you can trust her after this." "Damn, son, I just can't believe that happened right here in the store." "Yeah, I'll have the girls get right on the changes to the computer and so forth. We'll be over this evening to talk some more." When Dad and Mom came to my home that evening, they were devastated, especially Mother, who had loved Patty. She was the daughter they never had. I convinced them that it would be best if they let Patty go. I said, and I really believed, that Patty might do something to damage the business if she remained in her position. The next morning, when Patty found out she not only lost her husband but also her job, she became really angry. The next Monday, I received a countersuit for the divorce, and Dad was served with a suit for wrongful dismissal. It looked like we were going to be giving Lawrence a lot of money over this mess. We decided to have an outside accountant do an audit of the business. I was sitting in the bar Tuesday evening when Glenda walked in. Like most friends in our town, she didn't ask if she could join me, she just plopped down into the booth across from me. "What's this I hear about you and Patty?" she asked. I said, "Depends on what you heard, but I suppose most of the rumors are true. I caught her and Joe screwing in her office after work the other day. I got pictures and filed for divorce. The way it is going around town is you got jealous about her having male friends and talking with them in the store, so you filed for divorce. She is also saying you were vindictive and got your father to fire her so she couldn't even live." I laughed and said, "Well, Dad did let her go, but it was because she did what she did in the office and because he had our CPA come in and check the books. I can't say what they found, but she had made some other mistakes too. Now, can we just let it go?" "Yeah, I'm sorry, though. I know how you feel. That damn Joe did the same thing to me, you know. That asshole never could keep his pecker in his pants, except when he was at home." I saw a small tear run down Glenda's cheek. I reached over and wiped it from her face, then said, "Yeah, I think he screwed almost all the girls he ever dated and a lot of other men's wives. That was partly why I didn't want Patty to flirt with him or be alone with him. I really didn't think he would turn on a friend like that, though." Glenda and I downed a couple of beers while we visited, then I walked her out to her car. Just before she got into the vehicle, she gave me a gentle kiss on the cheek. "It'll get better, Stan, I promise." Days seemed to drag on. Work came and went. Some of my friends gathered around me to support me in my sorrow, some gathered around to support Patty and were no longer friends. Dad's trial for wrongful dismissal was to begin on a Monday. I was at home the Sunday before when I heard a voice calling to me from the side of the house. I have to admit I did not rise to greet my visitor. In fact, I fell on my bum trying to do so. I had been communing with John Barleycorn all afternoon, and I'm afraid he tripped me up. Well, to be precise, when I tried to get up from my Adirondack patio chair, I got my foot caught and fell on my bum. There I was, lying on the ground in a puddle of spilled Glenmorangie, looking up the dress of one of my best supporters. Linda was standing, looking down at me laughing. She squatted to help me up. "Can you even stand by yourself?" I have to admit I giggled more than I laughed when I said, "Well, I thought I could, but here I am lying at your feet when I tried to do it before you could help me up." Glenda broke out in a loud laugh at my comment. She did help me to stand, and I was able to do so more or less by myself. After we quit laughing, I invited her to sit in one of the chairs across from me, and I more or less fell back into mine. Linda was becoming almost a fixture around my house. Other than my mother, she was almost my only feminine companion, and I treasured her company. Unfortunately, today I really didn't want to see anyone, and I'm afraid it showed in our talk. Finally, Glenda looked at me and asked, "Stan, did I do something to make you angry?" I felt my chest heave and my eyes began running. I heard and could not talk. I scrunched up my face and just shook my head at Glenda. "No," I whispered. "You are almost the only one who even comes around any longer. Today, I have been feeling sorry for myself. I have also been thinking about the court case tomorrow. A few months ago, I thought I had it all, a loving wife, a great business, you know, the American dream. Now all I have is a broken heart, a busted marriage, and I am facing court battles to keep my and my family's material possessions. I am so angry with life and with what Patty did to me. I have turned most of my friends against me. All I know is that I want to hurt Patty, Joe, George, and Patty's parents so badly that they will be sorry they ever heard of me. That is almost all I think of any longer. I have plans, and they are not very nice. I know I follow through on them, you will leave me too, and damn it, I don't want that, but I can't help it. I want to hurt those assholes, and I know when I do, it will hurt me too." Linda rose from her chair and sat in my lap. She wrapped her arms around me and just held me. "Why, Stan? Why do you think I will leave you if you take revenge on those assholes? Haven't we been friends all our lives? What are you planning to do that is so bad? I don't understand why you are angry with George, though." "Oh, Stan, please promise me you won't hurt them." "No, Glenda." "Well, I guess that depends on how you define that." I don't intend to physically harm them unless they come after me first. I intend to do my best to drive Joe into bankruptcy and out of town. I intend to use all the money I can spare to take care of him and George, for that matter. Unfortunately for our friendship, I think what I intend to do besides that will run you off. You see, Glenda, I intend to steal their women just like they stole mine." Glenda pushed herself back from me and looked me in the eyes. "What, Stan? You're not going to? What do you mean? And you still haven't told me why you want to hurt George?" "Simple. I haven't told anyone, but George was one of Patty's lovers, so I owe him some pain. I'm going to move in on their women and bed them. I'm going to make them love me and take them from their men, like they took Patty from me, and I'm going to make sure Joe and George find out about it." "Stan, you can't do that. What about the poor girls? That will hurt them too." "Stan, please don't do that. It would devastate those poor girls more than just knowing what cheating assholes their men were. They would fall in love with you, and then when they found out you were just playing them, it would gut them. I can't believe you would even think about doing something like that. They're hurt enough just being with those cheating assholes." Glenda pushed herself back from me and struggled to stand. When she got to her feet, she looked down at me. "Stan, you're right. If you do something that despicable, I don't know what I'll do, but..." Linda turned and stomped out of my yard. I heard her car drive off shortly thereafter. My divorce was proceeding rapidly since we had such a good prenuptial agreement. It was mostly a slam dunk. I only had to wait for the normally slow movement of the courts. The trial for wrongful dismissal, however, was another matter. We were all nervous when the trial started. Patty's attorney made my father and me look like ogres. He twisted our every sentence and tried to put words in our mouths. Finally, things began to look up when our attorney began his questioning. He brought out how much time Patty spent visiting and flirting with customers. He called witnesses both from within and outside the company to verify the behavior. He brought out the fact that she routinely drank beer at the store, and while it was not illegal if done away from the business area, he made it look like she was ignoring her duties to do so. Lawrence called Dad's accountant, and this was one witness that did enormous damage to Patty. The accountant said that Patty had authorized Joe and George to exceed their preset spending limits, and she had authorized them extra time to pay. In fact, their accounts were 3 months past due, and they were only making token payments. Patty's attorney then asked about my large credit account and the fact I did not pay it off every month like the business required for other customers. My father said that was true, but that he had made a special deal with me and took an ownership interest in my structures to protect the business in case I defaulted. He got the cost of the materials I purchased for the buildings plus a 3% ownership for advancing me the materials. He pointed out that Patty had not only exceeded her authority in allowing Joe and George the higher credit, but that she had not even tried to protect the business in case they defaulted. Finally, the hearing ended after 2 days of testimony. When the decision was handed down, Patty and her father were almost charged with contempt of court. They were very loudly complaining because the decision went against her. In fact, the judge said, "Miss Train, you should thank your lucky stars your father-in-law chose not to refer this to the authorities. I think he could make a case for criminal negligence, perhaps even theft, against you and your 2 accomplices. I would suggest you remove yourself from this courtroom, and I would further suggest you think about the kindness shown you by these people. If they had countersued, I strongly believe they could have won a substantial settlement from you." Patty and her father were sputtering, and her face was white as they were escorted from the courtroom. As I was leaving the courtroom, Lauren stopped me and said, "Stan, I have good news for you. Just before the hearing began this morning, I was informed the judge signed off on your divorce. In 30 days, your marriage will be over. Do you want me to mail the papers, or will you pick them up?" That evening, my parents and I were sitting on their patio, relaxing after the trial. We were both glad and sad. We were glad we all came through unscathed except for the legal bills, and sad that my marriage and their relationship with Patty ended the way they did. We had done a barbecue and were now sitting with our liquid refreshments while we just chilled out. In truth, we were all feeling the effects of the liquor. I was just at the point of telling my parents how bitter I was. I said, "I still can't believe my friends would do something like that to me, much less that Patty would. If it takes me the rest of my life, I am going to make them pay for this." My mother looked at me in shock and said, "Oh, Stan, please don't do that. A man that lives with bitterness is a poor excuse of a man. Take the high road and live your life to the fullest." In the long run, that will make your life more fulfilling and could even make those three sorry for what they did. We heard the tap 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 of small footsteps on the sidewalk just before we heard a female voice say, "Thank you, Mrs. Tane. That is just what I have been trying to get him to do. If anyone can feel the pain he does, it is I. And I think I have risen above it." At first, I was just like Stan. I wanted nothing more than to eviscerate Joe, but bit by bit, as time went past, I began to let my anger and my desire for revenge slip away. One day, I realized I not only didn't care any longer, but I realized in almost every way I was better off without the cheating asshole. Glenda came fully onto the patio and looked directly at me. She continued, "Stan, I know how empty you feel now. I know the feelings that are still burning through your consciousness, but believe me, dwelling on them just makes them worse. Please let the anger go and get on with your life. Just next time, be more careful. Be more sure of the friends you choose and the woman you take into your heart. If you were to be honest, and admitting hindsight is 20/20, I bet you can see the seeds of this heartbreak existed before you married Patty. I know I could and still can see that in Joe. He always had an eye for the ladies and always chatted them up. He was always more attentive to them when we were out than he was to me, but I thought I was in love with him. I know you have said Patty was a lot like that. She always flirted with other men and reveled in their attention. Look into your heart and use this knowledge to better yourself. Don't lower yourself to their level and hurt someone. In the long term, it won't make you feel any better." I looked up at Glenda. She was standing, looking at me, and I would swear there were tears in her eyes. The sun was behind her, and her thin sundress didn't hide much. I could see the outline of her very womanly, very desirable body and felt myself respond. With superhuman effort, I wrenched my gaze from her. I felt a flash of disgust with myself. Here I was, not completely divorced, and I was drooling over a friend. Glenda went on with her conversation. She said, "I'm sorry for just dropping by, but I was on my way down to the tavern and wanted to congratulate you on your success today. I have to admit the phone wires have been buzzing this afternoon as people pass on their success in the lawsuit." Glenda looked at all of us and smiled gently, then continued, "I'll go now, but be careful and don't. Oh hell, I've heard already that Patty has some friends that are talking trash about you, and they have made some threats. I just wanted you to be careful and watch out if you have too much more to drink. Oh hell, I'm sorry. I'll just go. Good night." Glenda turned and rushed for the patio toward her car. We all just sat there and looked at each other. To say we were shocked was an understatement. Mother summed it up best when she said, "Oh, I just can't believe that. Why would anyone be that upset at us?" We continued talking for a short time about nothing of any consequence. I decided I was sober enough to return to my own home. I was getting ready to leave when the phone rang. Mother went in to answer it. I could hear her say, "Oh no." "When?" "Okay, he'll be there as soon as he can get there." She came out of the house crying and ran up to Dad. She said, "Cedric, that was the police. The silent alarms have gone off in the store, and they want you to come down and turn them off and see if anything is missing. They say the first car on the scene has said most of the windows have been broken out." "Oh, Cedric, how could someone do something like this to us?" Dad and I went to the store. When we got there, we found 2 patrol cars waiting on us. We went inside and turned off the alarm. We walked around and did not find anything obviously missing but told the officers we would have to take an inventory to be sure. There was some damage to some of the items inside from where the rocks had hit. We called Mom and had her bring down some sleeping bags so we could spend the night. The next morning, early, we called the insurance company and then made arrangements to have the glass replaced. I went home later that evening and found some of my windows also broken out. I called the police and reported the vandalism. Of course, they asked their questions, and when asked if I knew of anyone who might do something like this, I said, a few months ago, I would have said no, but now, especially after what I was told yesterday afternoon and what happened last night, I have to say I might. I just received a divorce because I caught my wife cheating with 2 of my friends. She used to be assistant manager at my parents' store. When I filed for divorce, Dad let her go. He had the books checked and found many improprieties. She filed a wrongful dismissal lawsuit against him, and he received a judgment in his favor yesterday. A friend told my parents and me that my ex-wife and 2 ex-friends had been making threatening comments. Now I wonder if either of them, or her family, could be involved in this. I know her father was extremely angry over the whole thing and cursed me several times. Of course, we had said something similar when the police took the report at the store. Now I was somewhat more sure we were on the right track. After the vandalism, things got back to normal, or at least as normal as they could be considering the hole that had been torn in our lives when Patty was forced out of them. My parents tried to get back to the way things were, and I struggled. Some days I would do okay, but usually, when I got home, I would remember Patty. The evenings were crap. If I was working, I could function fine, but the alone times were bad because it had been several years since I had been truly alone all night. I began going out most evenings for supper. I usually had supper in one of the sports bars or local hangouts, so I began drinking more than I had before. Of course, this just tended to make me lonelier and angrier with Patty and her lovers. I would see some of my crew or some of the friends I still had from time to time. They would try to cheer me up and slow down my drinking, but I didn't let them. Occasionally, I would see Glenda, and she would try to get me to let it go. One Thursday evening, I was out and saw a group of women sitting around a table drinking and having a good time. One of the women caught my eye. It was Susan, George's wife. Now, as far as I knew, no one knew George had been one of Patty's lovers. I remembered my promise to make him pay and walked up to the table they were at. I bent down and said, "Hi Susan, it's been ages since I saw you. Would you dance with me?" Susan looked up at me with a frown on her face, then she smiled. "Sure, Stan," she said. I smiled and took her hand to help her from the chair. I wrapped my arm around her waist as we walked to the dance floor. We had only danced a few seconds when the song ended. She started to head for the table, but I held her. I said, "Oh come on, Sue, you promised me a dance, and we hadn't even gotten going yet when the song ended. Surely you can give me a whole song to dance to." Susan relaxed and smiled. She flowed back into my arms when the next song started, and we began swaying to the music. She sighed and said, "You always were a good dancer. I wish George would take me dancing more. I always loved to dance when we were dating." She laid her cheek on my chest, and we swayed to the music until the song ended. She started to the table before the next song started, but I held her hand. When she turned to look at me, I gave her a puppy dog look and said, "One more, please, for old time's sake." Susan looked toward her friends, then smiled a nervous smile and moved back into my arms. As we danced, I said, "I don't mean to make you nervous. Since Patty left, I've been so lonesome, and it feels good to at least be able to dance with someone again. Sometimes I don't know how I'm going to make it." Sue turned her head up to me and said, "Well, Stan, you brought it on yourself. If you weren't so jealous, you wouldn't have lost her." I jerked my head back and glared at her. Before she could react, I hissed, "Jealous? I guess in a sense I was, but I'll be damned if I let my wife screw my friends and not do something about it. You're right, I kicked her out, and I'd do it again. But I still miss her." It was Susan's turn to break in. She said, "What do you mean? I heard you were upset with Patty flirting and finally just kicked her out of the house, then filed for divorce." I stopped dancing and just held Susan as I explained what I had seen the night I caught Patty. I did leave George out of it this time because I still wanted to make him feel the pain of seeing his wife with someone else. When I finished talking, Susan looked at me and said, "Stan, I just can't believe that. I know Joe is a horn dog, but even he would not do that to a friend. I've known Patty all my life, and she's just not that way. Are you sure you actually saw that?" Now I was pissed. I said, "Yeah, I know what I saw. If you don't believe me, come out to my house and I'll show you the pictures." I turned and started to walk away when Susan grabbed my arm. "Stan, I'm sorry, but, George said you were just on a real tear." I suddenly remembered I still had the pictures on my phone. I really wasn't thinking when I pulled it out and said, "Here, look at these pictures and tell me Patty or my friends wouldn't do something like that." I handed the phone to Susan and stood as she scrolled through the pictures. I heard her gasp when she saw the first one of Joe and Patty. I had forgotten about George. I remembered his picture was on the phone when I heard Susan cry out and saw her stop scrolling through the pictures. She was staring at a picture, and then tears began rolling down her cheeks. She moved to the next picture and began sobbing uncontrollably. She dropped the phone and ran toward her friends. Now I felt like an a-hole. I ran after Susan and was intercepted by two of her friends. One of them said, "What did you do to her? I thought you were a friend. Why is she crying?" I pushed through the two of them and knelt by Susan's side. I took her hand and said, "Susan, I'm sorry. When you didn't believe me, I got angry and decided to prove I wasn't lying. I forgot I had the pictures of George on the phone." One of her friends grabbed my phone from the floor, and as she started looking at the pictures, she said, "What pictures? Oh my God, that son of a witch." All the girls, except for the one trying to calm Susan down, gathered around my phone to look at the pictures. They were all muttering, and I could tell they weren't sure whether to be more angry with me or George. Finally, Susan looked up at me and said, "Just get out of here, Stan. Please, just leave me alone." I stood, took my phone from the girls, and slowly walked away, driving back to my home. I felt like crap. I really did like Susan, and now I was party to her unhappiness. I wondered how I could have ever thought what I had planned to do to her was okay. I was sick at the hurt I had caused her just by letting her see the pictures. How much worse would it have been if I had taken her to bed and then sent the pictures to George before letting her see them? I was sitting on my patio, communing with John Barleycorn, when I heard a car drive into my driveway. I didn't move, even when I heard the car door slam and the pounding on my front door. I took another drink and sat staring across my little slice of heaven. I could make out the shadows of the trees in the moonlight. Finally, I heard the tap, tap, tap of small feet coming around the house and a voice yelling, "Sten, where the hell are you? I know you're home. I can see your truck in the garage. Sten, I'm not leaving until you talk to me. Now open up." As she was saying that, the woman walked up to my back door and began banging on it. Finally, I had enough and said, "Okay, just stop banging on my house. I'm over here." "What the hell do you want?" I turned and saw Glenda as she stomped up beside my chair. "Damn you, Stan. I just came from the bar and grill. Did you really have to hurt Susan like that? You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? I ought to beat the tar out of you." I sat and stared up at Glenda, then grabbed her arm as she slammed it down, trying to strike me. As I was wrestling with her, trying to keep her from hitting me, she lost her balance and fell into my lap. I quickly wrapped my arms around her and held on as I said, "Glenda, stop it. If you don't stop, I'm afraid one of us will get hurt. Look, I'm sorry I upset Susan tonight. It wasn't intentional. I had been thinking about what you said, and all I was doing was dancing with her." She began getting on my case because of the way I treated Patty, and I lost it. She told me I got what I deserved for being so jealous. Without thinking, I told her I had pictures of Joe and Patty on my phone. I forgot there were also pictures of George, and when I handed it to her for her to look at, she saw them. Of course that hurt her, and she began crying. She and her friends told me to get the hell out, and I did. Everyone I had talked to about my planned revenge had advised me against getting it by taking it out on the women. I had already decided not to do that. I know I hurt her, but I just didn't think, and I didn't do it on purpose. At the same time, though, don't you think she deserved to know what a cheating a-hole George is? Of course, if she had any sense, she would have realized that by now. She caught him cheating on her enough while we were in school. She should have known he was a cheater. Once a cheater, always a cheater, you know? Glenda was still struggling but had calmed down considerably. Finally, I felt her relax even more, and she demanded I let her go. I carefully relaxed my arms, and she moved from my lap and over to one of my chairs, where she once again sat down. I could tell she was looking at me. I heard a sigh, and then she said, "Sten, I don't know what to believe. When I got to the bar, Susan and her friends were already gone, but everyone I talked to told me what a butthead you had been to her. They said you were dancing, and then she broke away from you and ran back to her chair crying. I just thought, are you sure you didn't do anything to her?" I reached into my pocket and threw her my phone. Here, I said, "call her yourself and ask her what I did." All I did was forget the damn pictures on my phone, and she saw them. I didn't. Glenda and I heard a roar, then screeching tires. Almost immediately after that, we heard the crash of metal on metal. Next, we heard a car door open, then slam closed. We heard running footsteps and a male voice yelling, "Stan, you son of a witch, get out here. I'm going to kill you, you son of a witch." We heard a splintering crash, then footsteps slamming through my house. Lights began to come on as the intruder went from room to room. I could see George taking swipes at some of my belongings as he went through my house, room to room. Finally, he came back to the kitchen and saw Glenda and me on the patio. He didn't even open the sliding screen door, he just ran through it and toward me. I had stepped away from the chair I was sitting in to meet him. I jumped back just in time as I saw the tire iron he swung at me. "You a-hole," he screamed. "You didn't have to show Susan those damn pictures. It's not my fault you couldn't rein in your wife, but no, you've always tried to get Susan away from me. Even in high school, you did all you could to steal her. Now you've ruined my marriage, and this time you're going to pay, you a-hole. She kicked me out of the house tonight and said you had showed her those damn pictures. Didn't you learn anything from having your house and store trashed? I guess we'll just have to trash you this time." George swung the tire iron once more, and this time it hit me on the shoulder. Damn, that hurt. Thankfully, it was a glancing blow. I could faintly hear Glenda talking on the phone as I dodged George's blow. I managed to get my chair between us, and after he swung once more, I picked it up to use as a shield, perhaps as a weapon. George kept swinging the tire iron and hitting the chair. He was so angry he was crying as he screamed at me. Glenda was trying to calm him down, and he turned toward her. "Shut up, you witch," he screamed at her. "I might have known you would be around somewhere. Birds of a feather do flock together, don't they? What, are you here to celebrate screwing over Joe again?" George took a swipe at Glenda, and the end of the iron caught in her blouse, tearing it open. He stumbled and almost fell. As he was stumbling, we heard the sirens from the arriving police cars. We heard the cars screech to a stop in front of my home. I saw the flashing of the red lights on the surrounding trees and watched as officers came around my house, following the sound of the altercation. As the officers came onto the patio, George caught his balance and turned to me once more. As he turned, he screamed, "You a-hole. I'm going to kill you. You've screwed with me for the last damn time." He began moving toward me once more. The lead police officer took in the situation and said, "Sir, put the tire iron down and stay where you are." George looked over his shoulder at the police and continued toward me. This time, when he got close to me, he lunged and brought the tire iron down in an overhand strike. I was backing away and trying to get the heavy chair up to block the blow when my foot hit the edge of a flower bed. I lost my balance and fell backward. The chair landed on top of me, and I felt intense pain as George stumbled and fell on top of me. He lost his grip on the tire iron but was still trying to hit me. The officers moved in and grabbed George. They quickly put him in cuffs. One of the officers led him back around the house to the car. The other officer moved the chair off me and helped me stand. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked. I was standing, breathing hard. I felt the shakes begin, then I was enveloped in a hug as a crying Glenda embraced me. I looked toward the officer and said, "Yeah, I think we're fine. He got in a couple of licks, but I don't think anything serious is wrong. Just give us a moment, won't you, please?" I turned to Glenda and cuddled her to me. I ran my hand down her hair and over her back. I said, "Glenda, it's okay now. It's all over, honey. Just calm down now, okay?" Finally, I felt Glenda relax. She stopped shaking from her sobs and just clung to me. I bent down and gently kissed the top of her head, then turned to the officer. "Okay, I think she's okay now. Can we get on with this?" I looked up and saw a couple of plainclothes officers coming into the yard. They already had their notebooks out and their cameras working. It took 2 hours to give statements and show them the damage to my house. George had slammed his truck into Glenda's car when he arrived, so we had to fill out reports about that, too. We found out, though it was no surprise, that he was drunk as a skunk when he arrived. It looked like he would have several charges laid against him: DUI, breaking and entering, assault, 2 counts, and possibly attempted murder. Glenda verified he had threatened to kill me, and the first officer on the scene confirmed he had made the threat when he attacked me. By the time all the officers had gone, Glenda was still clinging to me and softly crying as we sat on my couch. I looked at the clock and saw it was nearly 3 a.m. I sat and gently held Glenda as she drifted off to sleep. I moved from beside her and bent to pick her up. I carried her to my guest room and laid her on the bed. I took off her shoes and covered her with a blanket, then staggered to my own room. I was still asleep the next morning at 10 a.m. when I heard, first, a banging on my destroyed front door, then footsteps coming across my living room and down the hall. I slipped from bed and moved to hide behind the door in case the people coming were not friendly. As the steps came closer, I could hear talking. I heard 2 female voices and the man's deeper voice. I finally recognized them and stepped from behind the door to confront my father and mother. They had Susan with them. All three jumped when I appeared from my hiding place. Susan and my mother gasped when they saw me, and Dad said, "Damn, Stan, you look like hell. Are you okay, son?" My left arm was hanging almost useless from the bruise, and I knew I would need to have it x-rayed. I had several scratches and was pretty dirty because I hadn't even cleaned up before I crashed the night before. I gave them a small smile and said, "Yeah, I guess I am. My arm hurts like hell and my place is a mess, but at least I'm alive." Susan pushed past my parents and hugged me. She looked up into my eyes and said, "Oh, Stan, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. When that drunk and cheating-ass scum-sucker came home last night, I didn't even let him in. I had put some of his clothes in a suitcase and threw it onto the porch. I told him we were done and to get away. I'm so sorry. I told him I had seen the pictures on your phone. I didn't know he'd try to hurt you. I'm so sorry, Stan." As she was talking, Glenda came padding up behind my folks and Susan. She stood looking at us for a moment, then moved through the group and stood beside me. Her face looked so scared. When she touched my left arm gently, she gasped when I said, "Ouch," and jerked away from her. She started to pull back, and I wrapped my arm around her. She tensed up, then I felt her relax and move into my embrace. All three of my guests were staring at us. I said, "Glenda was here when George arrived last night." I looked over at Susan and continued, "She was giving me hell for being mean to you when George came screaming into my drive and slammed into the back of her car. She saw the whole mess and almost got hurt very badly when George tried to hit her with the tire iron." As I was saying that, I noticed her blouse was still torn. What really bothered me, though, was the blood I saw on her white blouse. I quickly turned her toward me and stepped back. I tore her blouse open and said, "Are you hurt badly?" "I'm sorry, Glenda. I didn't know that a-hole actually hit you. Why didn't you tell me you'd been hurt?" Glenda grabbed her top and tried to hold it closed as I bent forward to see how badly she had been cut. She backed away from me and stood half turned away. "Stan, it's okay. He just barely broke the skin. It's only like a scraped knee and not more than a couple of inches long. I'm okay, Stan." Mother and Susan grabbed Glenda and pulled her toward the master bathroom. I heard Mother say, "Come with me, Glenda. I don't care if it's only a scrape, we need to clean it up and take care of it. We also need pictures of it in case the police need them." Dad and I looked at each other for a moment, then turned to go into the kitchen to make coffee. We were sitting on the patio drinking our first cup when the three women came back out. Glenda was wearing one of my shirts. Linda pulled one of my chairs up near mine before she sat down. We all sat and finished the pot of coffee and discussed the night before. As we were visiting, I found out that Susan had read about George's arrest in the paper. It had only said I had been injured, not how badly. She rushed over to my parents' house to see how badly I was hurt. They had already seen the article and called the police for information. They were just coming out of the house to come see me when she arrived, so she came with them. They said they had tried to phone me but got no answer. That, of course, got me looking for my phone. I could not find it, so finally I had Mother dial it. We heard it ringing and found it lying on the ground in the flower bed near where I had fallen. Apparently, Glenda had dropped it when George had attacked her. After we found the phone, the three women went into the house and began preparing lunch. I realized I was starving. I had not had supper the night before and no breakfast either. I took a nice hot shower while they were preparing lunch. When I was finished, I made Glenda take one as well. After she returned from her shower, we ate and visited until mid-afternoon. I don't know how many phone calls I received from friends and employees checking on me. I also had several visitors stopping by to be sure I was okay. The only phone call I really minded came from my ex. She didn't identify herself, but I saw the phone number was her parents'. All she said before she hung up was, "You lucky weasel." After my guests left, Glenda and I sat on my patio under the old growth oak trees and looked over the small stream running through my property. It was dusk, and we could see a couple of deer come out of cover and begin grazing. We were sitting in a large padded swing, and without thinking, I slid slightly closer to her, put my right arm around her, and pulled her closer. She looked up at me and smiled. I smiled back at Glenda and said, "How do you feel now? Does your stomach hurt where that a-hole hit you?" Glenda smiled up at me and said, "Not much. It is more of a pulling from the scab and a little burning occasionally. What about you? Your arm is still swollen, and I can tell you can't use it very well. We really should have taken you to the doctor. I was so scared when he came after you and hit you so hard. When you fell, I was sure he would kill you like he threatened. I could tell from the look in her eyes that she had been truly worried about me. I watched her closely, and somehow her face changed. It got softer and her eyes glistened more. Some way I never realized, but I found myself leaning down and giving her a gentle kiss. Glenda turned more toward me, and I felt her arm go around my neck as she pulled me down and held my lips against hers. Finally, we broke the kiss and leaned back, still looking at each other. I think we were both shocked by what we had done. I know I was. I felt my face tighten and started to apologize. Glenda put her fingers on my lips and said, "Don't say it, Stan. I don't know where that came from." We sat looking over the stream, our thighs gently touching until it was too dark to see that far any longer. My stomach growled, and we both laughed. I stood and reached out to help Glenda get up. "I'm hungry, and I don't feel like cooking. What do you say we trip down to Sam's and get a burger?" Glenda argued a little about doing that, but in the end, she agreed to go. Except for our aches and pains and the steady stream of friends and acquaintances coming to our table to check on our health, the meal was very pleasant. We talked and even laughed together more than we ever had in the past. I could feel the difference in our relationship, but I still did not think of Glenda as anything other than a really good friend. Finally, about 9:30 p.m., Glenda leaned back in her seat and said, "Stan, I hate to be a party pooper, but we really need to get out of here. Tomorrow's Monday, and we both have to work. I need to get back home and do some laundry too. I can't believe I came to your house Saturday night, and we have spent the entire night and day together. I didn't get hardly any of my weekend chores done. The next 3 days were pretty rough on me. I never did go to the doctor for my arm, and it hurt like fury every time I used it. Late Wednesday, I was trying to help a crew raise a long wall for the current house we were building. One of the brace boards slipped and grazed my arm. I felt an excruciating pain go through it, and this time I could barely move it. My foreman took me to the hospital. This time I was almost in tears from the pain. The emergency room doctor gave me hell when he saw me. He told me I was lucky I hadn't injured myself permanently. My arm was severely bruised and had a serious fracture. They were also worried about blood clots, and in addition to splinting my arm, they gave me medication to reduce clots. He put me in the hospital overnight for observation. Between the pain pills and being super tired, I just went to sleep after they got me into a room. I never thought of calling my parents or even Glenda. I had sent my foreman home, telling him I would call one of them to get me when the doctors were done with me. No one knew, therefore, that I was in the hospital. Thursday morning, about 10:30, my foreman called my parents to talk to me. He told Mother he had been trying to get me on the phone for over an hour and I didn't answer my home phone or my cell. He asked, "What time did you get him out of the hospital? He must really be sleeping hard if he can't answer the phone." Mother came unglued at that and informed him they had not gotten me out of the hospital. He told her that I must have called Glenda then because I had told him I would call one or the other. He also explained why he had taken me there. Mother told him she would check on me and get back to him. As soon as she hung up, she called Glenda at work, and I became the proud owner of 2 scared, worried, and pissed off women. After she called my father to let him know what was going on, she took off for the hospital. Glenda arrived at the hospital about 5 minutes before my mother because she was at work and didn't have as far to drive. She came screaming into my room, yelling at me and crying at the same time. She rushed to my bed and balled her fists up. She looked down at me and began yelling, "You a-hole! Why didn't you call me or your mother? We've been worried sick ever since Harry called your mother trying to find you." I looked up at Glenda in shock and then felt my face burn from embarrassment. I said, "Oh crap, it was almost 11 before they finished with me. They gave me some pain medication and then decided they needed to keep me overnight. I was drifting in and out of it, and I just totally forgot. Crap, I'm sorry, Glenda." I saw my mother standing just behind Glenda when I said that, and she said, "You're going to be even sorrier if you ever do something like this again. You have half the town worried to death right now, son. If Glenda doesn't beat some sense into you, I will. Now, how are you feeling?" About that time, I realized Glenda was holding my hand and looking down at me with a strange, almost loving look on her face. The 3 of us talked more, but Glenda had to leave because she had a showing. Mother decided she needed to make a few phone calls to let people know I was okay. Before Mother got back into the room, my doctor came by and released me. Mom took me home and made sure I was comfortable. She fixed me a pot of her delicious cream of chicken soup for supper and then left to go back home. I was eating my supper when I heard the doorbell ringing. I was slow getting up and moving to the living room, and before I got there, I heard a loud pounding on the door and Glenda yelling, "Stan, are you okay? Damn it, answer the door or say something. Are you okay?" I finally got the door open, and she stood there with a scared look on her face. She brushed past me and said, "Damn it, what's the matter with you? Can't you answer the door or at least tell me you're coming?" I was scared something had happened. I calmed Glenda down and apologized, then invited her to have some soup while I finished my supper. Over our meal, we calmed even more and began visiting like old friends do. We both relaxed, and things were almost back to the way they had been, but there was still something. I was so tired after the hot soup that I began yawning and could hardly hold my head up. I had taken a pain pill when I started my meal, and I suppose it was making me tired. Glenda saw I was almost out on my feet and insisted I go to bed. It was a little after 8 by then, so I let her bully me into doing that. I don't even remember covering up that night. I woke early the next morning, Friday, and got up. I normally sleep nude, but I found I still had my briefs on that morning. I stripped them off and started for the shower. Before I got there, I decided to make coffee so I could have a cup as soon as I finished cleaning up. I was standing at the kitchen counter when I heard the patio door slide open. I turned toward the sound and heard a gasp. I felt my heart leap with fear, then I felt my face heat up. Glenda was standing in the door, staring at my naked form. Glenda turned away from me and began stammering. She said, "Oh God, I'm sorry, Stan. I should have knocked, but I saw the light on in the bathroom and there wasn't a light here. Your mother and I talked last night after I put you to bed and decided I would check on you before I went into the office. She gave me a key to your back door, and I was going to make you breakfast. I'm sorry." "Okay, Glenda, no harm done, I suppose. But unless you want another lecture, you need to turn around." I had started to shower and decided to make coffee first, so I just came in like I was. "Why don't you sit down, and when I get done, we can have some coffee before we decide on breakfast." When I returned from my shower, I had put on a t-shirt and Docker shorts. I was going to the work site today but didn't plan on working, so I dressed to be as cool as I could. I found Glenda sitting on the patio, watching the mist rise from the small stream as the newly risen sun's rays slanted down through it. I got a cup of coffee and joined her. She just looked up at me and smiled. Neither of us said anything for a short time. Then she looked over at me and said, "God, Stan, it's so beautiful and peaceful here. I'm so jealous of you. I wish I had the money to buy this when I sold it to you, and now I want it even more. You've got the most perfect home here." "Yeah, I know. I wouldn't give this up for anything. I came so close to losing it, too." Patty insisted on a prenuptial agreement before the marriage to protect her savings and potential inheritance. She had her attorney leave out protection for me, and I didn't catch it. My father caught the fact the agreement only protected her and sent me to an attorney who advised me to include wording in it to protect my pre-marriage property, like she did hers. If I hadn't done that, she might very well have either gotten this place or I might have been forced to sell it during the divorce. I think Glenda saw the change in me when I began talking about the divorce again. She reached out and placed her hand on mine, then said, "I'm sorry, Stan. I didn't mean to bring back bad memories. I know how easy it is to slip back into those feelings of anger and hurt. It took me over a year to be able to think about Joel and our divorce without getting angry and hurt again. What's it been for you?" "About 6 months now. Glenda, around 7 since the divorce was granted and only about 5 from when it was finalized. I still want to get even with that witch and her friends and family sometimes. I find myself thinking of ways I can hurt them all like I was hurt. I am so glad you and some of my other friends talked me out of what I was planning earlier, but I still need some payback, you know. I wonder now, remembering the way her first prenuptial agreement was worded and how angry she and her father got when I changed it, if she and maybe even he didn't want to get their hands on my families and my property. I was so convinced she loved me and was trustworthy, but now looking back, do you remember how Patty was in school and college? She was a flirt and put out more than most of you girls did. I guess I was just like most of the guys. I fell for the pretty face and fine body. I was sure after she said she was mine that she was solely mine. Now I wonder if she ever quit screwing around and if she was just using me like she used to use her other boyfriends. She was always an expensive date, and if you didn't give her a great gift for special occasions, it took forever to get back in her good graces. I think her picture should be used in the definition of high maintenance. Glenda looked over at Stan and squeezed his hand. I know how you feel, Stan. Joe was sort of like that. He always wanted more toys. We didn't have much money when we were married because we were young and just starting out in life. I wasn't selling much real estate, and he didn't make much working as a framer for his first company. I was always arguing with him because he bought luxuries before we paid our bills and bought food. A time or two, I had to borrow money from my parents to buy food or pay utility bills. He was always cashing his paycheck and drinking a lot of it up on payday. Now you sit while I go fix some breakfast. It's almost 7:30, and we both need to get to work soon. Stan leaned back from his empty plate and said, Glenda, that was great. I thought Mom made delicious omelets, but this one made hers look like a beginner's first attempt. Now let's get our butts in gear and get to work. Leave the dishes, and I'll take care of them tonight. No, it won't take long to put them in the dishwasher, and I refuse to leave dirty dishes lying around. If you have to go now, do it. It won't take me 5 minutes to clean up here. Stan sighed and moved to help Glenda. In less than 5 minutes, they were done and going out the door. She had parked in the center of the driveway. He opened her car door for her, and as she started to get in, without thinking, Stan leaned down and gave her a gentle kiss. Glenda gasped and stepped back. Her eyes were almost frightened when he looked down into them. Stan hadn't even realized what he had done until she had that reaction. Oh, Glenda, I'm sorry. I didn't even think about what I was doing. Crap. Glenda got in her car and sat looking out the window at Stan for a moment. Finally, she put the key in the ignition and started it. Stan watched as she turned her head without a word or gesture and backed down his driveway. He was still standing there as she drove out of sight. Stan didn't see or talk to Glenda the rest of the day or that weekend. He went to his parents for lunch on Sunday, and his mother got in his face as soon as he walked into the kitchen. She said, Stan, what did you do to Glenda Friday? I called her last night to see how things went, and she began crying. She never would tell me what the problem was. I sent that girl over there to help you, and if you hurt her... Mom, I didn't do anything. We sat and talked on the patio with coffee, then she made breakfast. I didn't do anything or say anything. I don't have any idea why she's upset. Are you sure she's upset with me? All I did was... Stan stopped talking and stared into space. His mother stepped closer to him and said, Stan, what did you do? I was putting her in her car to go to work, and, oh hell, Mom, I kissed her. I apologized, and she didn't say anything. She just left. Betty looked shocked, then she laughed and said, oh, no, you didn't do anything to her, did you? Well, I'm sure she'll get over that. Your father's in the den, go on in there until I call you for lunch. Monday evening, Stan was sitting in his den/office working on his books and preparing bids. Unfortunately, he wasn't getting much actual work done. In fact, he was staring at the computer screen and thinking. His thoughts wandered from Patty to Joe, then to Patty's parents. He still wanted to do something to get even with them all for the hurt he had been put through. He would start to plan something, then he would remember what Glenda had told him months ago about being a better person if he let things go and forgave them. When Stan's thoughts wandered onto Glenda, he felt himself cheer up. His heartbeat increased, and he even felt the beginnings of arousal. He frowned, then shook himself and, with a sigh, turned back to his work. He was working on a proposal when he had a great idea. He knew how to get even with Joe and not be totally an a-hole about it. The beauty of this plan was he could also tweak Patty and her parents at the same time. Patty and Joe were living together now. Patty was only working part-time as an assistant manager of a convenience store. Rumor had it her parents had to help her and Joe with living expenses fairly regularly. George, of course, was no longer a problem because he had been sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison for his actions the night he attacked Stan and Glenda. His departure from the business he and Joe ran had put a financial strain on Joe. In the divorce, Susan had gotten half of George's share of the business. Rumor had it she was causing Joe a lot of trouble because she was demanding her share of the profits in cash immediately. As soon as the money came in, she was in a position to make sure Joe didn't cheat her either because she was the business's accountant. Joe was struggling financially because he had to pay for more help since George was not there to do his job. They had been running a two-man handyman and small construction and remodeling business, only hiring extra help on larger or rush jobs. With the added labor and Susan keeping track of all his expenses and bank accounts, Joe was having trouble maintaining the wide swath he was used to. All Stan had to do was ramp up his small sideline of handyman and fix-it business. He could undercut Joe on prices, make sure the work was better, and drive him out of business. He smiled and went back to work. The next morning, Stan called the foreman of his remodeling and repair crew into his office. He explained that he wanted to expand in that area and gave him instructions to make sure the jobs were done faster than the bid time. He also instructed him to go the extra mile by doing a little extra work free of charge. Stan told him he would bid the jobs closely and to take all the new work he could get. He promised that if more employees were needed, he would pull crews from new construction until they could hire qualified help. Stan smiled when he said that because he knew where the help might come from. When they needed more employees in that area, he would offer Joe's best part-time men a slightly higher salary to work for him. After his foreman left, Stan picked up the phone and made a call. "Susan," he said when the phone was answered. "Susan, this is Stan. I have an idea I want to run past you. Can we meet for lunch?" At lunch, Stan explained his plans to Susan. At first, she was upset, even a little scared. "Damn you, Stan. You can't do that. I am barely making ends meet now, and if you ruin the business, I'll lose part of my income. Hell, I might even lose my house. You can't do this to me. Haven't you done enough already?" Stan was shocked at first, then he began to smile. When Susan saw Stan smile, she became more angry and snarled through her tears, "You a-hole. You really don't care who you hurt if you can get even with Joe and George, do you?" She started to get up from her chair as tears fell from her eyes. Stan reached out and grabbed her wrist. He pulled her toward him and said, "Susan, wait. I didn't realize. I'm sorry, but I think I might have an idea. I don't want to hurt you or anyone who hasn't messed with me. Please sit back down and let me explain." After the meal and their discussion of his plans and Susan's fears, Stan leaned back in his chair and said, "Okay, if I understand everything we've talked about and agreed on, we can do this. You get your current income and the chance for much, much more later. I get some satisfaction from Joe. I'll have my attorney draw up the agreement. After everything is done, you will trade your 25% share in Joe's remodeling business for a 25% share of mine. You will transfer all ownership of your share of the tools, goodwill, and other assets and receive a prorated share of mine. You understand? We will keep separate records of the remodeling section, and that is the only part of my business you will share profits in. I will incorporate as 3 separate businesses under a holding company umbrella. We will then have the remodeling division you will own 25% of, and a new construction division and landscape division. I will be the president and chief operating officer, and you will be the chief financial officer. We will not tell Joe about our agreement until absolutely necessary." Susan agreed, smiled, and nodded her head. It took 3 weeks for all the paperwork to be completed, then they started operating under the new structure. Really, nothing changed in the public perception. Everyone still called on Stan for bids, and he was still a hands-on manager. The main change was the growth of the remodeling section. Several weeks before Stan and Susan made their agreement, Glenda had become a semi-permanent fixture at his house. The night Stan and Susan made their agreement, Stan went home and found Glenda once more in his kitchen cooking supper. She was humming and flitting around his kitchen when he came into the room. He just stood with a smile on his face and watched her work. Several weeks before, he had given up and given her a key to the place. He had become embarrassed many times to arrive home later than usual and find she had either been there and left or was sitting waiting for him to return. Neither of them had taken time to define their relationship, but there was definitely one there. Many evenings, they would sit in his living room and watch TV or work on projects together in his office. They were a couple, even if they never officially acknowledged it. Glenda finally noticed Stan standing in the doorway and stopped flitting around. She saw him watching her and asked, "What? Why are you just standing there watching me? Is something wrong?" Stan shook himself and walked into the room. He approached her and gave her a gentle kiss. It felt so good when he felt her wrap her arms around him and hug him. She raised her head and gave him another quick kiss, saying, "Supper will be ready in about 10 minutes. Why don't you go clean up while I finish?" Stan walked into his bedroom and did as she asked. He returned to the kitchen as she was putting supper on the table in the breakfast nook. He walked up behind her, placed his hands on her hips, and pulled her against him once more. He let his hands and arms slide around her onto her stomach, leaned down, and kissed her neck. "It smells wonderful. Thank you. But you really don't have to do this for me. I can make my own meals, you know." "Yeah, but this way I know you're eating right, and neither of us has to eat alone, do we?" Glenda replied. Glenda watched Stan throughout the meal, and as they were finishing, she asked, "Okay, Stan, you're up to something. You look too pleased with yourself for it to be anything normal. So, what's going on this time? Did you get another big contract or what?" "No, nothing like a big contract or anything like that," Stan said. "I've been talking with some of my employees and another owner of a small remodeling business. We've decided to enlarge our remodeling crew and take on more small jobs. I've merged that owner's business with the remodeling part of my business. I'm going to incorporate, and the corporation will have 3 divisions: remodeling, new construction, and landscaping. The new investor will become my chief financial officer, and I will be president and CEO. "Oh, that's great. Who is this investor? Do I know them?" "Well, it's not a him, it's a her. And yes, you know her. Susan is having trouble making ends meet, so I let her buy into my remodeling business with her share of George and Joe's business she got in the divorce. The corporation will pay her a slightly higher salary than she makes now part-time as an accountant, and we expect her share of the profits from the remodeling business will be greater than she gets now from Joe. She should be able to live better and won't have to worry about income from Joe. She said he is having more and more trouble making his payroll, and her profit share has shrunk badly over the last year." Glenda looked over at Stan and said, "And this wouldn't be a way to give Joe the shaft now, would it?" Stan replied, "Well, not really. It's a good business decision. I've been turning away remodeling work for a long time because it isn't as profitable as new construction. But, well, it might hurt Joe, but that isn't my only reason for doing this." Glenda sighed and said, "I should have known you couldn't let it go. Just don't get all tied up in the revenge and forget you are a businessman. I don't want to see you doing things just so Joe will get hurt. Are we clear on that?" Within 5 months, Joe was on his last legs. He was being constantly hounded by creditors, losing help because many times his paychecks had bounced when they tried to cash them. In short, he was down and out. Stan had hired away all the good workers, leaving Joe with inexperienced or poor workers. Joe had many complaints about the quality of his work, and as his reputation slid, so did his profits. One night at their favorite hangout, Sam's Cellar, a local bar that served wonderful pizza and sandwiches, Joe staggered up to the table where Stan and Glenda were sitting. He was already drunk. "Well, you and the witch finally did it. I hope you're happy now. I had to close up shop today. I had to file for bankruptcy. I don't know how you managed to get Susan to shaft me and George like she did, but between her disloyalty and your cutthroat tactics, you have ruined me. I ought to beat your ass for that, you scumsucker." Stan responded, "I haven't done anything. All I did was expand an already existing part of my business. I got tired of turning down work when it was offered, so I decided to take it on. It's not my fault if you aren't a good enough businessman or contractor to keep your business going. As for Susan, she needed a steady, trustworthy income because she was having trouble making ends meet. She knows our business because she has worked as an accountant and bookkeeper for you and George, as well as working part-time in Slick's accounting office. She wanted to buy into my business, and all she had to do that with was her share of yours. I took that share and hired her to work for me. That's it. Now move on. Glenda and I want to have supper in peace and unwind from the week." Joe sneered, "You just couldn't stand it that I was the better lover and nailed your skanky wife, could you? That's what this is all about, isn't it? Well, let me tell you, she keeps telling me how much better I am than you were. I can make her scream when she climaxes. I bet you never did. I don't know why you let her go and took up with this little 304. Hell, you know as well as I do that if you could get it into her, you'd get just as much pleasure beating off as you do screwing her. Hell, she's probably a lesbian. She almost never climaxes when she gets screwed. At least I got the best woman out of the deal." Joe turned to walk off, laughing loudly. Stan jumped to his feet and started to follow him. Glenda rapidly stood and caught him. She pulled him back and said, "Stan, no, let it go. It's not worth it." Stan looked down at Glenda, feeling his anger surge once more. She was looking up at him pleadingly, tears coursing down her cheeks. She saw his expression change again and felt her stomach tighten when his lips tightened. "Please," she said. Stan turned to her and pulled her into an embrace. They stood for several seconds like that as Stan felt Glenda shudder from her silent tears. Finally, she pushed back from him and wiped her face with her fingers. She took his hand and led him back to their table, where their supper was cooling. When they were about half done eating, Glenda looked up at Stan and said, "It's not true, you know." Stan looked puzzled and asked, "What's not true?" "What he said about me." "It's not true. I'm not a lesbian, and I can climax when the man is someone I love and when he takes his time to do it right. Joe is a wham-bam, see-you-later-mom type guy. Sometimes he didn't even get me ready before he did it to me." Glenda was silently crying again as she told Stan. He stood, threw enough cash on the table to pay for their meal, and walked to Glenda, gently helping her from her seat. They cuddled all the way to his truck. Instead of taking Glenda back to her house, he took her to his. He helped her into his house, and they sat in his living room drinking wine as she cried from time to time. Glenda curled into him and placed her arm around his neck. They just sat holding each other. Before long, Stan realized Glenda was sleeping. Stan smiled and stood, picking her up carefully. He walked down the hallway with her and entered the guest room where she had slept the night George attacked them. He removed her shoes and gently covered her while she slept. Stan returned to the living room, made sure all doors were locked, turned off the lights, and went to his bedroom. This time he completely stripped and crawled into bed nude, as was his practice. It took him a long time to get to sleep, but he finally did. The next morning, sunlight was streaming into the room. Stan felt strange. He was content and had slept better than he had in a long time. After he fully awakened, he realized he was lying on his back with a feminine form snuggled up to him, her head on his shoulder. She was staring at him with her gorgeous green eyes. When Glenda saw Stan was awake, she rose and gave him a gentle kiss. Time seemed to stand still for the couple. Finally, with a sigh, they both relaxed, and Stan rolled to the side to lie on his back beside Glenda once more. She laid her head on his shoulder and smiled up at him. He watched her for a moment and his eyes opened in shock. Glenda pulled her head back and asked, "What?" Stan said, "I just realized. I felt like there was something different between us for several months. But Glenda, I love you. I know this probably isn't the best time to say that, but that's what had been bugging me about being with you for so long. I wanted to be with you, and when we weren't together, I felt off. When we were together, it felt so different from before, when we were in school or even when you and Joe were married. You were my buddy, but it felt different, and I kept wondering why." Glenda smiled, glowed, and rose to sit beside Stan. She looked down at him as she sat cross-legged in bed beside him. "I know, silly. I've loved you for just as long. I knew the night you put me to bed after George. I had been feeling that before, but I wasn't sure. I knew that night, though. I was so scared for you, and you were so good to me. You put me to bed and didn't take advantage. You've been so considerate of me ever since your divorce. I could tell last night. I've wanted you for so long, and you just never made a move. When you would kiss me, I just knew that you would go for more, but you never did. Last night, you did it again. You took care of me, you put me to bed, you held me, and let me cry, and I felt better. I woke up about 3 this morning and went to the bathroom. You were lying there uncovered. I decided I was tired of waiting. I stripped and got in bed with you. I thought about but I waited. I wanted our first time to be perfect, but I wanted to be sure you really wanted to do it. Oh yeah, you've left me high and dry so many times, but we were friends, and I didn't want to ruin what we had." Stan pulled Glenda down and kissed her once more, then said, "We need to get up, honey. I'm starving, and if we stay here, I'll attack you again." Glenda smiled and said, "And that would be bad? Why?" As she was saying that, she saw Stan roll away from her and sit on the side of the bed, then stand. She followed him from the bed and into the bathroom, where they showered together. Of course, they made sure all the interesting parts of each other were squeaky clean before they left. Glenda bent to pick up her clothes, but Stan grabbed her arm and gently pulled her up. When she was standing and facing him, he said, "You don't need that. I don't usually wear much around the house if I know I'm going to be alone, and well, I really like looking at you." Glenda giggled and stood. She stepped into Stan once more and gave him a gentle kiss. She stepped back and said, "Okay, Buster, but if I get burned cooking breakfast, I expect you to kiss it and make it all better before breakfast." Stan and Glenda took their coffee on the patio. They had slept past their usual rising time, so the sun was already up. It was still cool enough to be comfortable. Stan put his cup down and stood. He gently pulled Glenda from the seat and toward the pool. "How about a quick dip before we eat, honey?" Glenda giggled once more and followed. She said, "Fine, but if we get caught, I'll never forgive you." Glenda began spending almost every night with Stan now. She was slowly moving her clothes into his house. 3 weeks later, before breakfast, while having coffee on the patio, Stan got up to refill their cups. Glenda was beginning to wonder what was keeping him when she decided he had gone to the bathroom. Finally, Stan came from the house with their coffee. He handed Glenda hers and then set his on the table beside the swing they used. Glenda watched him curiously as he knelt beside her, but slightly in front. He turned his hand upward and opened it. As he did so, Glenda saw a sparkle in his palm and brought her hands to her mouth. As Stan asked the question, she realized what he was doing. She was already crying and shaking her head yes as Stan asked, "Glenda, I know there may be more romantic ways or places to ask this question, but I feel like these mornings here on the patio alone with you are so special. Glenda, will you marry me?" Glenda held her hand out for Stan to slip the ring onto her ring finger. She was smiling and nodding her head yes, and she answered, "Yes." After breakfast, the happy couple dressed and went to see each of their parents to tell them the news. Neither Glenda nor Stan wanted to wait long to marry, so Glenda got busy arranging things for 7 weeks later. They reserved the church they both attended and the VFW hall for the reception. Everything was set, and they were so happy. 6 days before the wedding, on a Monday, Stan's doorbell rang. Glenda answered the door and saw Patty and her parents standing there. She just stood and stared, wondering what to do. Finally, Patty spoke. "Glenda, I know I'm not your or Stan's favorite person, but we need to talk to him. It's important. Please, can we just talk for a moment?" Glenda finally stepped back from the door and called over her shoulder, "Stan, honey, can you come here, please? Someone wants to talk to you." Stan came into the living room and stopped when he saw Patty and her parents. He opened his mouth to speak, but Patty beat him to it. "Stan, please, it's important. I know I'm not your favorite person and I know I hurt you badly, but this is important, and I don't want to. Can we just please talk for a moment?" Stan took a deep breath and finally gestured into the living room to the seating area. Glenda started to leave but then thought better of it. She sat on the arm of Stan's chair while Patty and her parents sat on the couch off to the side. Patty looked around and then at her father. Finally, Patty took a deep breath and began talking. "Stan, I know I hurt you and I don't have any excuse except that Joe and George had been my friends and, yes, even my lovers since junior high school. For the first couple of years after we got married, we didn't do anything, but then it started up again. They were always in the store, making suggestive comments. You know how I like to flirt, and the flirting got me so ready." Patty blushed and looked toward her parents once again. She took a deep breath and continued. "Finally, one night after the store closed, they wouldn't leave. We kept drinking beer, and before I knew it, they were screwing me. Stan, I'm sorry, but I did like it. I felt so alive and turned on being with both at once and knowing I was married to you. After that night, I tried to stop. I really did, but they kept pushing for more. They made it a point to be there when we locked up, and from the moment the last employee left, they would touch me, kiss me, and talk dirty to me. God help me, but I responded to that so much. I loved the feeling of being screwed in my office and in our store. I just never could end it. I don't know why I let them extend their credit line, but I did. Then they just pushed for more and more, and I let them have whatever they wanted. I kept getting deeper and deeper. Oh yes, I was angry at you when you just kicked me to the curb and didn't even try to save our marriage. Then, when your father found out what I had been doing at the store and fired me, I became even angrier. Joe and I began trying to figure out ways to make you pay." Patty turned her head toward Glenda and continued. "Glenda, he really became angry when he saw you and Stan together so much. By then, I was living with him, and Daddy was helping with our expenses. I'm sure you know how Joe spends money. There was never enough. Finally, Daddy made Joe sign over his business to him, but he let him keep running it. He put him on salary, and we kept a tight rein on the spending. Then you began taking on more remodeling work, and the business started doing even worse. We had less money, and Daddy put more into the business. Joe somehow managed to get some of it and spend it on himself and his whores, instead of using it for salary and materials payments. Finally, you had taken all his best employees and almost all the business available. We forced Joe to officially sign the sales papers for us, but it was too late. You forced us into bankruptcy. Joe even managed to spend most of the money I inherited from my grandparents. Daddy's store is over-leveraged now too because he borrowed money on it to pay off the bills we owed to the partnership when it went bankrupt. Stan looked over at Lucius and Marilyn, Patty's parents. They were sitting, watching as Patty told the story. They looked embarrassed and sick at the same time. Patty continued, "Stan, I know we know this is not your fault. We let Joe fool us. Before you ask, no, this visit isn't to try and get you to help us financially. We made our bed, and now we have to lie in it. I suppose the entire mess is my fault. I'm the one who couldn't keep her legs together and keep the best man I've ever seen." Patty looked over at Glenda and said, "Glenda, I know we weren't close in school, but I think I know you well enough to know you won't do to Stan what I did. I don't have any animosity towards you, and I've gotten over my animosity towards Stan. That said, we need to talk to you about your and Stan's safety. Joe came to us last night and asked for money. He also asked us for help. He blames Stan for his financial problems and is furious that the two of you are getting married. He says if he can't have me, he'll just have to take you back. We called the police and reported Joe's threats, but they say they can't do anything until they get some type of proof. We need to warn you, and we want you to know that if anything bad does happen, it wasn't us that did it, no matter what Joe may say." Stan leaned back in his chair. Glenda slid off the chair arm and into his lap, where he put his arms around her waist. Finally, Stan began talking. "You did hurt me, Patty, and I know I was never your favorite either," he said, looking at her parents. "I don't know what to say about this, though. I have to admit, I wanted to get some revenge on you when you did what you did, but I guess I never realized you were behind Joe and George's company. I don't know if I would have done anything different if I had known." Stan looked at the Snizes once more and continued. "I was really upset with you when you forced that prenuptial agreement on me and got angry when I changed it to protect myself as well as you. I have to admit, I have thought for years that you and she intended to take me to the cleaners in a divorce. At the same time, I wasn't angry enough at you to want to bankrupt you because of Joe and Patty. Lucius, if it would help, I might be willing to take an ownership interest in your store." Stan looked at Glenda, and when she nodded her head yes, he continued, "I would expect a proper share of profits if that did occur, but I don't want you to lose everything because of something Patty got you into." Marilyn and Patty began crying, and Lucius looked very uncomfortable. He had to clear his throat before he could speak. "Thank you, Stan, that means a lot to me, to us. But I think we can handle it ourselves. We're slowly paying off our debts, and the store sales are holding up well. We all got what we deserved except for you and Glenda." Lucius stood, then his wife and daughter followed suit. He held out his hand to Stan for a handshake as he continued talking. "We may not be the best people in town, and my daughter may have made some mistakes in her short life and hurt you, but something like Joe is considering his way out of line, and we'll do anything we can to help you with this problem." Patty looked at Stan, then at Glenda. She started to turn and follow her parents from the room, but then turned back. She bit her lip and said, "I don't like this. I never wanted my life with you to end like this. I think deep down I still love you some, but..." Stan broke in, "Sorry, Patty, that ship has sailed. Glenda and I have something now, something very special, maybe better than we ever had together. I'm sorry for you a little, but that's it. We're over." Patty looked at Glenda again and continued through her tears, "I never was one of your friends in school. I think part of the reason was because you were Stan's friend and I was afraid you would take him from me. Well, you didn't take him from me. I threw him away, and you rescued him. I hope you're happy. But if we see each other in the future, I hope you don't get too angry or think too badly of me if I don't speak. If you need anything from me, from us, to help with Joe, let us know. If we find out anything else, we'll let you and the police know." Patty walked up to Stan and gave him a gentle kiss on the cheek. "Goodbye, Stan. Good luck." As soon as this mess with Joe is finished, I plan on leaving town. Everyone knows what I've done and how I've hurt you, and I need a new start. Maybe next time, if I fall in love, I'll do it right." After the Stennis family left, Stan sat in his large chair once more and pulled Glenda into his lap. They just sat cuddling for several minutes. Then Stan reached for the phone and called the police. He verified that there had been a report of threatened violence against him, his parents, and their businesses. The detective he was speaking with told him they had already increased their patrols near his business interests and that there was supposed to be a car on its way to his house to interview him and bring him up to date on the report. As they were talking, the doorbell rang. When Glenda answered, she found a detective there. Stan told the officer their detective had arrived and that he would hang up to talk to him. 3 weeks later, one of Stan's company's unfinished houses caught fire. Arson was suspected, and patrols were increased around his building sites. 2 weeks after the first fire, a patrol saw a moving shadow behind Stan's office building. They moved to investigate just as flames erupted, highlighting a man running from the blaze. One of the officers gave chase on foot, yelling for the figure to stop. The figure turned, and flames blossomed from his fist. The officer felt a sharp pain in his chest and fell. While on the ground, he pulled his weapon and fired twice. The figure collapsed. The officer staggered to his feet, his hand going underneath his bulletproof vest to rub the impact area, as he and his partner carefully approached the body on the ground in the alley. Thanks to the call made from the police car, the fire trucks arrived in time to minimize damage to the office structure. The body was identified as Joe. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The next day, Stan called all his employees and told them not to report to work. He and Glenda were trying to relax on their patio. Stan turned to Glenda once more and said, "You know, honey, you were right again. I never wanted something like this to happen. I just wanted to hurt Joe and Patty a little to get even. I guess I never wanted anyone to die. I almost feel worse now than I did before. I guess the only good that came out of this is that I found out Patty really wasn't the bad, conniving which I thought she was, and I ended up with the brass ring when I got you." Glenda sat in Stan's lap and wrapped her arms around him. She gave him a deep kiss and said, "I know you didn't want anyone dead or even hurt physically. I do wish you hadn't done things this way, but in the end, it was really Joe's fault. He is dead. You were already in the same business he was in, and you beat him by being better than he was at it. Because he couldn't manage money, it was his fault he lost track of what was right and screwed Patty. Then later, he tried to hurt you by burning your buildings." In spite of all the excitement generated by the arson and Joe's death, Stan and Glenda's marriage started well. They were truly deeply in love, and as the old saying goes, love conquers all. Stan and Glenda returned from a short honeymoon trip to Florida to their respective jobs shortly after the first arson and supported each other during the uproar following Joe's death. Glenda got her real estate broker's license and opened her own agency as a fourth department of Stan's business. She specialized in Stan's company buildings and took other sales as they came up. When Stan's parents retired, his company took over the building supply center as a fifth department, hiring a manager to oversee it. Over the years, their family grew. They first had a son, then, 2 years later, a daughter. One day, Stan looked over at Glenda as she sat beside the pool, watching their 7- and 9-year-old children play in the shallow end. He smiled and said, "You know, honey, this is everything I ever wanted. I have a great business I love doing, and 2 wonderful children. Best of all, I have you." When it was happening, when Patty was cheating on me and we were in the middle of the divorce, I thought it was the worst, most hurtful thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. It was the best thing because I found you. What we have is so much better than what I had with Patty. I sometimes want to find her and thank her for making me divorce her." Glenda looked over at Stan and smiled through her tears. "I love you too, honey."